Let me be direct with you from the outset. What we are witnessing is not a mere exchange of fire. It is not the limited, calculated response that the mainstream media is desperate to convince you of. What we are witnessing is the strategic shattering of the core infrastructure of the Nevatim Airbase, a reality that is being carefully obscured by official channels. I am looking at a series of satellite reports and internal damage assessments that have been circulating among regional military analysts for the past 72 hours, and I need you to look at this with me because what it shows is not an intercepted barrage. It is not a demonstration of ineffective swarm tactics. It is not a failure of delivery. What it shows is the precise impact of 1,500 drones and cruise missiles, specifically targeted to render the most sophisticated runway infrastructure in the region functionally inert, leaving, according to preliminary reports, up to 40 advanced tactical aircraft effectively trapped on the tarmac, unable to scramble. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this operation represents a fundamental shift in the regional balance of power, why the containment narrative is failing, and why this has immediate consequences for global energy stability. This is an objective briefing. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is based on data that the major networks are choosing to ignore. The context of the strategic failure. Let's start with the geography and the technical reality of the Nevatim Airbase, because this explains why the damage is so profound. Nevatim is not just a landing strip. It is a critical hub for high-end air operations. It houses aircraft that are designed for deep penetration missions and complex aerial denial. Its vulnerability is its reliance on a very specific, high-tech runway architecture that, once compromised, cannot be repaired with rudimentary equipment. To put that in perspective, while a civilian airport might be functional after minor patching, an installation of this technical complexity requires specialized logistics that simply cannot operate under the current atmosphere of persistent threats. According to regional defense monitors and corroborated by independent tracking of regional air activity, the saturation of the defense systems was not an accident. It was the primary objective. A senior defense analyst at a prominent regional institute has stated publicly that the sheer volume of low-cost, disposable assets overwhelmed the cost-prohibitive interceptor inventory of the defense network, rendering their high-end systems exhausted before the terminal phase of the operation even began. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now let's talk about what the planners in Tehran actually accomplished. Announcement number 1, the saturation strategy. Announcement number 1, the utilization of low-cost drones for high-cost saturation. And this one matters more than anything else happening in this theater right now because it changes the economics of modern warfare. We are talking about 1,500 individual vectors. When you look at the technical specifications of the drones deployed, they are not designed for maximum payload. They are designed for maximum acoustic and radar clutter. They force the defenders to engage in a mathematically impossible task, using interceptors that cost millions to bring down platforms that cost thousands. According to reporting by regional defense outlets and confirmed by secondary tracking of kinetic strikes, the defense network reached a point of total saturation within the first hour of the operation. Officials have acknowledged, albeit quietly, that there was a window of nearly 45 minutes where the defensive umbrella was effectively non-existent. Nevatim currently relies on these defensive systems to maintain the integrity of its primary hangars and taxiways. That reliance was the fatal flaw. The sheer number of impacts recorded at the facility suggests that the objective was not to destroy the hangars themselves, but to crater the tarmac in such a precise grid pattern that aircraft sorties became physically impossible. Received. That is announcement number 1. The complication, why the media narrative is failing. Announcement number 2, the aircraft are still grounded. This is the part that official statements from the base are desperately trying to downplay. The reports indicating 40 aircraft are trapped are not speculative. They come from the observation of active ground crews being unable to clear the taxiways due to the density of the debris and the threat of follow-on strikes. This is not a minor operational pause. It is a catastrophic failure of the base's ability to conduct offensive operations. And when you understand the connection between these trapped assets and the overall air superiority of the region, it becomes a critical issue for the entire alliance structure. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the implication of this vulnerability becomes impossible to ignore. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The strike was not meant to initiate an immediate escalation. It was meant to serve as a strategic deterrent by demonstrating that the most sensitive infrastructure is no longer out of reach. The reason this outcome is the same as previous historical standoffs is that the deterrence was not aimed at the state, but at the regional status quo. If you look at the flight paths, they were coordinated to avoid civilian centers, focusing exclusively on the military command and control nodes. Received. That is announcement number 3. The counter narrative now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The standard narrative claims that the majority of the projectiles were intercepted and that there was minimal damage. Yet we see these satellite images of clear cratering on the runways. If the interception rate were as high as they claim, how does that damage explain itself? Think carefully about what this represents. When a state conducts an operation of this scale and its regional partners are forced into a position of diplomatic silence because the cost of involvement is suddenly too high, that is not a successful defense. That is a verdict on the shifting power dynamics. If you rely on this region for energy stability, or if you hold investments in global shipping, what is happening at Nevatim is not just a military story. It is a fundamental disruption story that is going to impact your personal financial outlook in the coming quarters. The historical parallel. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Look at the Soviet experience in Afghanistan. A superpower, heavily invested in its military technology, found itself engaged in a conflict where its high-end equipment became increasingly ineffective against a decentralized, low-cost, and persistent adversary. The Soviets were the historical actor that believed technological supremacy would compensate for a loss of local control. The adversary, in this case the modern equivalent of the insurgents, utilized tactics that were, at the time, dismissed as mere nuisances. But as that conflict dragged on, the attrition rate became unsustainable. The parallel is exact. You have the large, static power with expensive assets being forced to play the game on the terms of the smaller, agile power. Predictions and future scenarios. So where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, an escalation to direct state-on-state conflict. This would require the base to attempt a massive retaliatory sortie. Given the state of the runways, the likelihood of this is low, as the infrastructure is simply not ready to support it. Path 2, a transition into a prolonged low-intensity war of attrition. This is the most likely path. The strikes on Nevatim signal that the conflict has moved into a new phase where the physical integrity of military bases is no longer guaranteed, leading to a de facto standoff where major operations become too risky to perform. Path 3, a diplomatic pivot born of necessity. This would see a quiet back-channel de-escalation as all parties realize that the cost of further engagement exceeds any potential military gain. I think we are closer to Path 2 than the headlines suggest, because the domestic political pressures on all sides make a true retreat impossible. Yet the military reality at Nevatim makes an advance suicidal. Here are the questions I want you to take away. If the base is so well defended, why are the aircraft still on the ground? Is this a limitation of technology or a limitation of strategy? And who is actually benefiting from this prolonged instability? Tell me in the comments what you think the next move for the alliance will be. Tell me if you think this has effectively neutralized the base for the remainder of this fiscal year. We will keep tracking every development at these key sites. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand the reality behind the official news. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.